Welcome back to the series that covers 11 questions for commercial landscape estimators. My name is Michelle Penz, the Purple Squirrel Consultant, and after deciding to retire from the industry in 2022, I discovered that there's no modern training for commercial landscape estimators. So I wrote a book called An Introduction to Commercial Landscape Estimating. It is available on Amazon for $19.99, and you'll find a link to it in the description below. This is the 7th of 11 videos that are posted each week, and in today's video we're going to discuss how you manage workflow. Typically, we want to work in a linear fashion, and usually there are workflow conflicts, and I'm speaking specifically from the industry in Northern Illinois, where we have a specific landscape season that typically runs from April through November. And so during that time, there is a crunch to get all of the work done, and that leads to workflow conflicts. So people tend to want to work in a linear fashion, and when it's busy, you often have competing priorities, conflicting priorities. And so then the question is, how do you manage that? We tend to want to work in a linear fashion, and unfortunately, during the landscape season, we do not have the luxury of doing that. So the first thing I like to do is systemize my workflow. The most basic element that I use in managing my workflow is a simple spiral notebook. I know it's not high technology, and technology has its place, but sometimes technology is not always the answer, and you need to be able to list your daily tasks in a way that keep you organized and so that you don't forget about them. I am a very visual person, so it's important for me to be able to see those tasks on a daily basis. Sometimes people use a spreadsheet. For me, if it's not right there next to me for me to update and write down notes, I'm likely to forget about tasks. So I prefer a spiral notebook. I don't worry about prioritizing the tasks on that notebook. I just write them down as I get them. Later on, perhaps I'll batch those tasks together and reorganize it. But for me, that is the fastest and easiest way to stay on track and not forget any tasks. The other little trick that I used to do was if a task could be completed in less than 5 minutes, typically I did that task immediately, just to get it out of the way. Now I don't have to write it down, I don't have to think about it, I'm done with it. The other thing that we can do to manage workflow is to organize your documents, typically on your computer network, by project. So you want to create a project folder, and within that folder have all of your subfolders for your takeoffs, your contract, your submittals, and things like that. When I bid on a project, I only do one folder and I chuck everything in there, because in order to be successful, you have to bid on many, many projects. And in my opinion, it isn't worth the time to organize those bid folders per subject. So I just chuck them all in there. Now, if I'm awarded the contract, then I organize the folder, I create the subfolders for all of the documents. But just for bidding on it, it's enough, in my opinion, to have a bid folder, and that's it. The other thing that you want to do, typically during the slow season, like I said, this is specific to Northern Illinois, where we have a specific landscape season, and then during the winter, things do slow down. Now, that said, we still do bid on projects throughout the year, but we don't have to deal with production during the winter. So we have what are called winter projects. And sometimes those winter projects can include systemizing your processes to make your life easier during production season. You want those processes to be repeatable, and that way you don't have to think it's just automatic. You have systems in place and you get them done. A good example of one of those systems is a submittal library. So if you need to do submittals throughout the year, if you have a submittal library of what I would call static information, for instance, if you have fertilizer documentation, and usually for submittals, they want you to submit an MSDS sheet, a material safety data sheet. Well, that's simple enough to chuck into your submittal folder so that it's ready to go and you don't have to go digging around for it. So any kind of information like that that you can use for submittals, and you can just break them down into the individual folders. That way it's very easy to grab that information when you need to do submittals. Speaking of submittals, during the slow season, it's a good idea to prepare submittals during the slow season if you can. Of course, you can't do that with plants because they often want photos of the actual plants. For instance, the trees and shrubs need to be leafed out, the perennials need to be emerging from their pots. So unless you can get away with using stock photos, sometimes you can, but be careful with that. But if you need photos of the actual plants, then you're going to have to wait until spring when those plants start to leaf out and you can prepare photos for them. But for all of the other information, certainly you can get that all packaged up and ready to go. So that's an example of systemizing a process to make it easier during the production season. Now, during the season, when you do have conflicting priorities, I worked out an approach that was pretty successful. Now, this isn't a hard and fast rule. This is only a guideline. Sometimes there are going to be exceptions to that, but I have ranked different segments, different types of tasks in the order of priority. The first one being revenue, the second one production, the third one estimating. I know you'd think that would be at the top of the list, but it's not. And then the fourth one are general administration tasks. So in the case of a conflicting priority, revenue is the most important. Anything that brings money into the company. An example would be a change order. And the thing about a change order, it actually affects two of those priorities, right? It's going to affect your revenue. It's also going to affect production, because sometimes the guys in the field can't do the work until they have that change order. So that becomes a priority. Another example of a revenue activity that you want to address immediately is project reconciliation, so that you can get that final payout. So anything that brings money into the company should be your number one priority. I have never received pushback on prioritizing revenue. The second priority is production during landscape season. So when the guys are out in the field or somebody in the office has a question about a change order or a contract, and it affects the ability of the work to be done on a real-time basis, that becomes your next priority. You don't want people in the field waiting for you to answer before they can continue their work. You want to give them that answer immediately. And like I said, sometimes these priorities do shift. If a revenue task can wait for a little bit, you can get to that production task right away, answer that question, and now the guys in the field can continue their work. Of course, then there's estimating, the third task, and that would include looking for jobs, doing takeoffs, writing up proposals and things like that. And so there's some wiggle room because you want to time your work accordingly and manage your time so that you have enough time leading up to the bid date to get that work done. But if you have to make a choice, I've always found revenue and production always come first. Finally, there are admin tasks, and those are things like insurance and tax exempt paperwork, those little things that need to be done, those little tasks. And in fact, during a time crunch, you might want to lean on your supervisor. Perhaps there's someone else in the office that you can delegate those tasks to, and that lightens your workload and allows you to address those more important things more quickly. So like I said, these aren't hard and fast rules, they're just guidelines, but they're helpful for managing work during a bottleneck. And sometimes there will be exceptions, but this at least gives you a framework. Thank you for watching this video. Please hit the like, subscribe, and notification button if you found value in this video. And you can pop questions into the comments below and I can answer them in future videos. If you have questions or you're interested in training or consulting, my email address is in the description below. You can join me for the 8th video, How Do You Manage Client Relationships, next week. See you then. Thank you.